When I look at this watch, there is something that comes to mind, and that is passion project. When I look at this watch, I look at all the details, the design of it, the sort of story that's been injected into this watch, and I can foresee, or at least think in my mind, there is somebody trying to make their ultimate watch with their ultimate desires, with their ultimate interests, all into this one package and create a passion project watch. That's what I think about this particular watch I'm going to show you today. Hello, you're watching James. My name is James, you're watching me, and I'm talking about watches. Now, as an Australian, I don't get exposed to certain sort of historical things like castles. You guys over there that are watching in this video in Europe are probably used to a castle just randomly being on the side of the road. But here in Australia, that doesn't exist. That's why whenever I do travel to Europe, it is one of the things that I love to do. I love going to those castles, I love going to those museums, I like seeing the old armour and the swords on the walls, and I really enjoy that experience. That whole sort of medieval time is something that interests me. That sort of artwork from that time period and all the things that sort of came around that time period, including stories like King Arthur. It is something that really has been an interest of mine since I was a kid. And I think it is partially because I'm an Australian and I'm not really exposed to it beyond what's on the television or what is in books. So when Valimor Watches contacted me about their Kilgharrah watch, it really grabbed my attention because it had all these ideas, all these medieval ideas, all these fantasy ideas, ideas about dragons, all sort of encompassed into a watch. And when they offered that watch to me to be able to have in my collection, to be able to wear, enjoy, and share with you guys, I said, yes, please. That's why you would have seen this sponsored icon pop up, and that's why I'm going to be putting a description to their website below. No affiliation to their particular website, it's just a link there so you can check out these watches for yourself. Now, I want to show you this watch in my first impressions, and to be honest, there are so many things that stood out to me. This one might be a tiny bit longer than my normal first impressions video. So let's flip the camera and let's check it out. It is so nice to see a watch that has been so well thought out, and this Valimor Kilgharrah has been well thought out. Now, as far as I'm aware, Valimor is a mixture of Valiant and armour, but just the packaging itself is the first thing that stood out to me. It has been thought about. You have a sort of a dragon scale sort of look to the outer box, and then the inner box, it looks like an old school book. And this is sort of linking into sort of King Arthur and the legends of all that sort of stuff. So having the sort of case be a book is fantastic. And then you get a little bit of a surprise in here, because inside this envelope is a rather interesting little booklet. It says thank you, and then it gives you a nice pictorial sort of view of the King Arthur legend, or some legends of that time. We've got dragons and swords and sorcery, and this is what this whole sort of watch is sort of linked into, that sort of King Arthurian legend. But the packaging doesn't just stop there. We've got a booklet and a warranty card in here. Now the warranty card is done really well. It's made out of plastic and it has, again, that sort of a 3D effect on it, which is cool. Basic booklet. But what also stands out to me, again, just the thought out of this watch, just things that have been thought out. Look at that. That's the strap changing tool inside there. Now I'm not sure if that's a particularly special thing, but it just seems to be another detail in regards to this watch. And that leads me into the second of 5 things that stood out to me as soon as I opened this watch, and that is the details on this dial. I could quite literally break this down to about 4 or 5 different sort of things that stood out to me, but I'm going to say details on the dial because there's so many of them. Firstly, those hands. Wow, that's very cool, isn't it? Long second hand in gold. Then look at the texture on the dial itself. You've got those raised indices. I believe that's sort of like a plastic molded effect. But then look at the outer chapter ring. Yeah, there is details on details on details here. And the thing about these details is that they all go together well. You can put lots of details into a watch and it ends up being a bit of a mishmash of ideas and it comes out pretty terrible. This one, lots of ideas, a common theme that works really well. The next thing that really stood out to me is the details on the rotor. Check out those 2 dragons on the back. I have to say this rotor has probably now spoiled any further future rotors for me. This is the best I have ever seen. There's a real 3D effect to it and it's just so cool. And you'll see the details are then continued on the outside of this case back with that sort of dragon skin as well. Really special. Whilst we have this strap off, you can see that this is a limited edition. This is number 46 of 50. So there's only 50 of each of these watches available. So if you want one, you're going to have to check it out fairly soon because I know they're selling out. The next thing that stood out to me is what I've been talking about, this common theme. Every element of this watch links together, from the interesting crown there, to the bracelet profile, to the dial, to that case back. Everything's linking together, and it is so nice to see on a watch a theme that has been thought about, something that he's been really interested in making into a watch or putting into a watch, and then putting it all over the watch, and it all coming together really well. The next thing, the last thing that really stood out to me, is the dimensions. This is a really nice sized watch, so it sits on wrist really well. As you can see, my 6 3/4 or around about 17 centimeter wrist, it has a perfect wrist presence. Really comfortable on wrist. This is a nice size for this sort of style of watch. This sort of, I guess it's a diver style, not a dive watch, but a diver style with a bracelet. It just feels good on wrist. But I've now spoken about a lot of things that I really like, and I do really like a lot of things about this. And I'm really looking forward to actually having this on wrist for a while to really get to know it. But there's a few things that stood out to me that are probably not as good. And I want to point them out to you now, just in case you are going to be jumping onto the Valimor website and wanting to buy one for yourself. Firstly, the bezel. It looks cool. Love the edge of it. But there is a little bit of play there, so please be aware of that. It is also a 60 click, not a 120 click. Unidirectional. Now, as I mentioned, one of the best things about this watch is that rotor, and it is something rather special. But that rotor is on top of the Miyota 8315, which is good from the perspective that it is a Japanese movement that is reliable, and it also has 60 hours of power reserve, but it does have that Miyota sort of swing. You do feel it and hear it on this watch, especially with that see-through caseback, which is what you want because you want to be seeing that rotor, but it is something to be aware of. If you have issues with that Miyota sort of sound and feel, that could be an issue. It doesn't bother me too much, but it is something worth noting. Also, it is a butterfly clasp here, which is actually okay, but I have to admit, because there's no half links that come with it, I haven't got the perfect fit. I've ended up having this one just a little bit loose on wrist, which is not a deal breaker for me. I don't mind watches being a little bit loose on wrist, but definitely something to be aware of. And lastly, the quality versus the price. I think the price of this watch is okay, and I think you're paying for the looks of this watch, the details of this watch, the interest factors of this watch. You're probably not paying specifically for the quality of this watch. The quality is good, but it's probably not outstanding, so it's worth keeping that in mind. I'm certainly going to say it's something worthwhile considering because it is so cool, but the quality versus the price, maybe there's a little bit of a mismatch there. But I am looking forward to having this one on wrist for some time before I do the full review. Until then, maybe check out these two videos next.